Do you know how much damage heavy metals could be doing to your body? These harmful substances can build up in your system and cause a huge range of problems and symptoms. Unfortunately, heavy metal poisoning is also becoming more and more common these days, which is why it's important to be able to detox safely. And that's very important for your long term health. You're listening to the Dr. Lamb Show, where we give information and advice on adrenal fatigue and integrative medicine. And we want to empower you to take control of your health in small and big ways to live your healthiest life. So, I'm Dr. Carrie Lamb, board certified in family, anti aging, and regenerative medicine. My work in Korea have focused mainly on functional and holistic medicine and an emphasis in lifestyle and nutrition.
And hello, I'm Dr. Jeremy Lamb. I'm also board certified in internal medicine and anti-aging medicine as well. And my career mission is to treat and reverse chronic diseases. And so today we're going to be talking about heavy metal detoxes in terms of adrenal fatigue. And just in case you don't know what heavy metals are or which ones you should especially be worried about, we're going to start with the most common toxic metals in the world today. And the first one would be mercury. And mercury is a toxic metal. In the olden times, it was found in thermometers before the electronic age, but it's also very common in amalgams or fillings that mercury was used for many, many decades. And of course, mercury now is also filled in the fish. So, especially coastal fish within 2 or 3 miles from the coast, and almost all fish nowadays have there is some mercury in them, and not by intent, but from the runoff in the water from the soil and the pollution. And so the bigger fishes actually have more mercury in them because they also eat up the smaller fish, and the mercury builds up in their system. So deep sea fishes are different. If you go further out, 60, 70 miles out from the coast, then those fish are okay, but those are very hard to find nowadays. And so it's important to try and eat more organic and clean fish if you can find them. And so, Dr. Carey, what's the number two toxic metal?
Yeah, so one was mercury. Number two is lead. And lead can be found in a lot of different places. And most commonly was the paint that we use to paint old houses. All right. Nowadays, most of the new paints don't have lead in them, but definitely if you live in an older home in the 60s, the 70s, you have to be very careful about the lead that can be peeling off your painted walls. And today, though, lead can be found in our pipes, which actually provide water and the sewage system in all our homes. And lead can also be found in toys. And make sure you know where your toys are coming from, because there could actually be toxic levels of lead in them, especially if your child is going to be biting on these toys. You definitely don't want your child to be exposed to lead. And that's why pediatricians will always check your child for lead toxicity when they're at a young age, 2 years old and things like that, to make sure they don't have lead in their body. Because it is cumulative. Once it's in your body, you cannot get rid of it easily unless you have special ways to chelate them out, which we'll probably talk about later. So it's best though to avoid them. Okay. Dr. Jeremy, what's our third metal to avoid?
The third would be aluminum. And that is something that we use very often. I also use very often. You find that in aluminum foil and aluminum cans, canned food, right? All have aluminum. Now, aluminum can go into the brain and cause plaques and also cause inflammation. So you should stay away from aluminum and try to use glass instead. The other thing actually that has aluminum is deodorant, right? So go check and see if your deodorant has aluminum because you don't want to be putting that on yourself. Now, the fourth toxic metal is arsenic, and arsenic can be found in groundwater runoffs. It can also be found in pesticides, right? So what they're spraying to prevent insects to get on the plant and the food that you're eating. And so that's how arsenic gets into your system, and that can be toxic.
Mhm.
Those of you who live in rural areas, using well water, it's important to have your water checked for these heavy metals on a regular basis.
And that's also how you see rice has a higher, if from certain places have higher levels of arsenic because of the water that has been polluted with arsenic. And there are ways to be able to get the arsenic out of the rice that you eat, but you have to boil the rice 3 times. I know it's really hard, and the rice probably will not turn out very great anymore once you boil it 3 times. But definitely making sure you know where your rice is coming from or the water that you're intaking, have it checked and make sure there's no arsenic in it is very, very important. And the last, fifth, heavy toxic heavy metal that we would like to talk about is cadmium. Cadmium can be found in a lot of paints. Painting this time, like cadmium yellow, cadmium blue, that artists use. I'm an artist, so I definitely know the names of these
Mm.
cadmium metals because it helps to actually bind the paint supplies together and help it go on smoothly. But this type of metal is not good for long-term use. Okay, and cadmium can also be found in pesticides and in water if you're not careful, depending on your area. And cadmium can also stay in your system and be very hard to take out. So you got to be very careful on how you are taking in any of these heavy metals, okay? As they do not belong in the body and they can accumulate. You have a whole lifetime. Occupational hazards or environmental hazards. You don't know what type of water you were drinking 20 years ago, or what kind of fillings you got in your mouth from 30 years ago. They could still be cumulative in nature. And so if you suspect that you have some form of metals in you, talk to your healthcare professional. There are a lot of different types of testing we can do for heavy metals. Dr. Jeremy, why don't you tell us a little about these testings?
Well, oftentimes you can do, hair analysis, serum analysis, and urine as well to help really detect the heavy metals. And so at Lamb Clinic, we actually also do order heavy metal testing. We help identify toxic heavy metal exposures and then also help with detoxing and building a healthier lifestyle. So if you think that this is something that's going on in your body, you can give our staff a call at 714-709-8000. And if you enjoyed this podcast so far, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And now that we understand what heavy metals are and where we could potentially get them, what are some of the common symptoms that happen with heavy metal toxicity, Dr. Carey?
Right, we have to differentiate between acute and chronic. Acute metal poisoning is definitely a medical emergency in many cases. So you have to go to the ER right away. And that could be memory loss, joint pains, bleeding. Those are very severe if you have acute metal poisoning. So if you just suddenly drank some water and you feel nauseated, you're vomiting, you have headaches real bad, you're breathing abnormally, you're confused, that is more of an acute heavy metal poisoning. Or if you see your child eat some paint off the wall and they start being a little more loopy, then you definitely need to go see them, go to the ER, okay? Especially if they're having cramping or seizure-like activity. And so that is the acute metal toxicity, but what we're gonna focus on more is symptoms of chronic heavy metal toxicity. Tell us a little more about that, Dr. Jeremy.
Well, initially, chronic heavy metal toxicity, you don't really have any symptoms. That's why it's so hard to grasp and so hard to figure out because these heavy metals accumulate very slowly. And your body has the reservoir to allow these metals to hide. And so you feel nothing until the symptoms appear. And by the time you actually feel symptoms, that's when your body is usually weak or the levels are very high. And so normal people go through their life and don't feel it. And this has been the biggest challenge, right? But some people do feel some symptoms, such as achy joints, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, migrating discomforts, not really a pain, but just kind of these migrating discomforts that moves around. You also could have floaters, brain fog, gastric discomfort that comes and goes. And so all these are signals that the body is sending out, but we have to pay attention because these are so subtle and so mild that it often escapes, our mind and our thoughts.
Hmm. And you don't know what your body signals are sending you because it could come from a lot of different places. So it's very important to find a practitioner who knows, hey, this sounds like this could be, or knows your history, right? You have to also look into your own history of how much fish you've eaten, or whether you have amalgams in you, metal amalgams, or any exposures that you might have had in the past. Or if you're a hunter, do you have you exposed yourself to a lot of lead from hunting? Okay. So it's very important to know that maybe you're having a difficulty with detoxing, you're getting more and more sensitive, then then you might want to think about dealing with these heavy metals. Okay. And so what is a way that we can definitely deal with these heavy metals and the detox?
So to work on heavy metal detox, you really have to work on the detox pathway and make sure that your liver is able to detox properly. Your extracellular matrix is also optimal to be able to go through metal binding. Now, the most invasive way is to do IV chelation, right, where you bind out the heavy metals through IV. Now, if you are having adrenal fatigue, or sometimes if your body's constitution is weak, you may not be able to handle this type of chelation. And we see cases all the time where they go through this and your body actually ends up more worse, right? Because your detoxification pathways are not strong enough. You end up having this detoxification reaction, and makes your whole body worse. So oftentimes we approach it more from a gentle approach. And Dr. Carey, what is kind of these gentle approaches that we use?
Right. And just to make sure you never want to do this by yourself, okay, even with a gentle approach of detoxing, because your body might be as sensitive. And like you said about the retoxes, you can have these toxins come out, but if they continue to circulate and you can't truly get them out, you're going to feel worse and you can crash even more and cause more stress to your adrenals. And so there are gentle ways of doing it, but you always want to do it with guidance. And so things like vegetable juicing, even celery or all types of vegetables can actually pull metals out of your body very gently, very slowly. Things like chlorella, spirulina, and those superfood greens are very great at having metal detoxing. And one of my favorite supplements is glutathione, okay, which also is very good at detoxing both the liver, your extracellular matrix, and also recycling vitamin C. Those are also another gentle way that you can build up in the detox pathways to help your body be able to take out metals gently and slowly without over crashing somebody.
So if you believe you have acute symptoms of heavy metal toxicity, don't delay and go to the emergency room for help immediately. But if your symptoms fit more with chronic exposure, then long-term changes are more important. And here at Lyme Clinic, we can help you identify whether you have heavy metal toxicity or not, and also help implement changes to be able to create a healthy and safe heavy metal detox routine to help improve your health rather than damage your body. So don't hesitate to give us a call at 714-709-8000, and we can help you get your body on the right track.
If you've liked this information or found it useful, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. And we hope that you've learned a lot about heavy metal detoxes and share it with your friends and family. This is the Dr. Lamb Show. Remember that we're here to empower you to take control of your health.